I'm Seth Dobrin. I'm the founder and CEO of Qantm AI. I'm the former Chief AI Officer of IBM as well. I've been in the AI space since the mid-90s. So AI, despite what everyone thinks, is not new. It's been around for quite some time. And today I want to talk to you about my journey, about AI, about what I've learned over the last 15, 20 years transforming companies using AI. And so I'm going to start with AI being personal. So I'm not up here, these black things in my ear. I'm not wearing AirPods or anything. These are hearing aids. AI is personal to everyone. So my hearing aids actually sample the environment 18,000 times every hour. And they adjust and pick up sound and adjust so I can hear you speaking to me 18,000 times every hour. That's amazing, and that's AI. And that makes it so I can hear, so I can have conversations. And that really is powerful if you think about it. And that's how it impacts me every day and has for a number of years. So it's not new. And think about how it impacts you on your smartphones, in your day-to-day life, outside of work even. But now let's start talking about how it impacts us at work and how it has impacted us across the enterprise, as I said, for many, many years. So my journey transforming companies starts all the way back in 2006. So when I joined Monsanto, which is an agriculture company, to take a process that is very much like a pharmaceutical pipeline, which means there's tons of entries at the beginning of it, that we want to get a single product from out of the back. Now, the big difference between an agricultural pipeline and a pharmaceutical pipeline is, with an agricultural pipeline, you can't just build more capacity, you're constricted by land. A pharmaceutical pipeline, you can build more factories. And so what Monsanto wanted to do was they wanted to use AI and laboratory facilities to move all of that on the computer. So basically, they wanted to take computers and be able to generate new seeds using computers, or combinations of seeds using computers. So that's what they hired me to do. So all the way back in 2006, we started doing this. And we were actually, over the course of 10 years, we were quite successful in being able to do this. And over the course of that time, between that project and many others, we generated about $20 billion of new value for a company. And it's a $20 billion company, or was a $20 billion company, using AI. And so you think about the impact that has on the top and bottom line of a company. In fact, that's why Bayer ended up buying them, was because of the impact that AI had on them. And so at that point, I left and joined IBM, became their chief AI officer, and flew around the world, not only helping transform IBM, but also helping a lot of IBM's customers think about how do they do the same types of things that I helped Monsanto do. And so over the course of that time, taking what I learned, sorry, I talked about that already, talking about what I learned both at Monsanto and through my time at IBM, I've taken that into my business at Qantm, and I've turned that into to what I'm doing now and talking about how I help companies transform in my business at Qantm AI. But now that AI, as of 2022, November 2022, has been top of mind for everyone, I want to step back and talk about what are the foundations of AI. Because now AI is top of mind, everyone thinks AI is ChatGPT, right? And ChatGPT is not just AI. So really, what is AI anyway? So let's level set. So really, AI is statistics. And statistics has been around for like 80 years, and it's probabilistic. And we hear about these hallucinations, right? We hear about ChatGPT making stuff up. Part of that is because of statistics. So 90% likelihood something's going to happen. That means there's a 10% chance it's not going to happen. Machine learning is statistics, but because of compute power that we started getting when we got cloud capacity, the statistics can now learn continually over and over again. So it's no longer static, it's continuously learning. Okay? And these are the same exact algorithms that we've been using for 80 years, No difference. Now we get into deep learning. And when you start hearing about black box models, so things that we can't explain, these are new math. So these are not the algorithms that have been around since the 50s or earlier. These are the types of models that we can't understand. And these are the ones that are newer math that are unexplainable. And so then, now we're starting to get into things called pre-trained deep learning models. And these are the types of things that started getting developed about 2016, 2017. And we hear about ChatGPT, and OpenAI was founded about this time. And these pre-trained deep learning models came about during this time frame. And they're also called foundation models. And so foundation models are the basics of what we think about when we think about the bottom, what ChatGPT is. So generative AI is actually a type of foundation model. And so generative AI and language models, which ChatGPT is a type of language model, is a type of foundation model. There's lots of other types of foundation models, as we're seeing today with ChatGPT being able to do vision and image and all sorts of other things, right? And so, but they can do lots of other things too. And so they can do speech, they can do code, they can do tons of other things. In fact, language models, lots of things can be thought of as language. Genetics can be language, chemistry can be language, all sorts of different things can be thought of from a computer's perspective as language. Then you have images, you have videos, and again, 3D and lots of other constructs. Now, when we think about how these models work, oftentimes, when we look at these things, when we first engage with ChatGPT and these types of tools, the first things we think about is, I want to have a conversation with it, and I want to create some content. These are actually the least interesting things that you can do with these models. The way these models are actually trained help you to do what are the most interesting things with these models. The way these models are trained is they went through all of the content that you all created on the internet, they classified it, and they created new content from it, so they learned from it. And so now imagine being able to discover all of this new content and train all sorts of new things on it. So we've all been in companies for many, many years. We've all had our own personal share drives for many, many years. Imagine being able to actually get knowledge from it for once, right? I know I've had a Google Drive for the last 15 years. I don't know half the stuff that's on it. I'd be amazing if I could find something on it that I wanted for once. You could do that with this now, today, right? And so being able to now have a conversation and discover what is in your share drive with something like ChatGPT, integrating all these things is really where the power comes in, and we're starting to see these systems be able to do this today. And so this holistic view of these generative AI systems is what you're starting to get to. And you'll hear terms in the press about things called RAG, right? You've heard RAG and things like that. This is what they're talking about, is kind of being able to pull all these things together and focus on your content. And that helps to reduce hallucinations. And by the way, if any vendor ever comes to you with the current technology and says, we're going to eliminate hallucination for you, they're either lying or they don't know what they're talking about. So just keep that in mind. Because this technology has no way of not hallucinating in today's form. And so I spent the better part of the last 8 years flying around the world talking to customers. And I discovered, in the first couple of years that for most organizations, AI is really a scam. Companies invest millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars in these programs, and they get little to no value. Now, why is that? Now, because lots of companies end up piloting AI. So I always go around and I ask this question. So who in here in their organization, and I want you to keep your hands up, right? Who is piloting AI in their organization? Raise your hands. Don't be a dull audience. Raise your hand. Most of you are piloting AI, right? And keep your hands up. Okay. So who has AI in production in one line of business? All right. That's pretty good. Who has AI deployed across the whole of the organization? All right. That's about average. So one person. Okay. So that's the point. Right? So in most cases, when I say who has AI is piloting, almost the whole room, usually 70% of the room at least has their hands up. By the time I get done, no matter how many people are in the room, it's usually less than 5% have it in production across the whole of the organization. And so the way I used to explain this is a CIO or a CDO or a CEO would go to a conference, they'd sit next to their buddy, and he'd say, how many data scientists do you have? And she'd say, I have 100. And he'd go back and tell the person that sits next to him, go hire 101. And they'd have no strategy. And the problem is that most organizations are not tying their AI to tangible value. And what you really need to do is you need to start with the value to your organization. And over the course of the last few years, so back in 2018, McKinsey came out with a study that said AI has the potential to add 26% to total GDP. And that was annual. And it has an opportunity to add, that's $13.7 trillion annually to GDP. Now, when generative AI came out, they did a study, and they said by 2030, on top of that already annual increase from AI, there's going to be another $4.4 trillion of GDP added. That's an additional 40% of economic growth. So this value is ours to take or lose. Now, how do we do this? It has the potential to revolutionize every industry, including this one. And I think when we look at how it can revolutionize the media industry, and actually one of my biggest clients is in the media industry, so I spend a lot of time thinking about and helping customers in this industry transform. When we think about how it can transform any industry, there's some general use cases that go across every industry. And when we look at things, we often think about, where are places that we can automate processes away, but there are also places where we can help people do things that they don't want to do in the first place. So for instance, cybersecurity. One of the first projects that I helped someone do was around cybersecurity. And the cybersecurity professionals were taking all of these phishing incident calls. They had no desire to take these phishing incident calls from us morons that were clicking on the phishing emails and going through and saying, yes, and succumbing to them. And so we help them use generative AI to respond to those phishing incidents, help them change passwords, go out into their Outlook, to their LDAP system, find out who else responded to that email, send them an email, change their passwords, and do all this stuff in a completely automated fashion. That is an incredible use of generative AI. No one lost their job. The cybersecurity professionals were able to do things that we were actually paying them to do. They thought it was incredibly valuable work. So that's an instance where generative AI is not displacing anyone. The team was ecstatic to do it. The management was ecstatic that they were doing it. And that's because it was helping them do their jobs better. It was not displacing things. So we often hear scary stories, and don't get me wrong, there are going to be places where people are going to lose their jobs. And the only way that we're going to get this value is if we figure out how do we re-employ those people that are going to lose their jobs? Because we're not going to get economic growth if everyone's out of a job, right? And so we need to look at these use cases, and we need to think about not only how do we get cost savings by getting rid of people, but how do we re-empower those people? So I already talked about content discovery. Think about business process automation. How do we automate processes? So in your line of work, think about how much of the work that you do could be automated. So when you're generating content, how much time do you spend ensuring that the content that you're developing meets brand guidelines? Imagine being able to automate that for different parts of the world, for different clients. Think how powerful that would be. Automating it all the way down to the creator, so that when someone is creating content, they get feedback saying, this is not meeting the client's brand guidelines, or this is going to be deployed in the Middle East and in France. The way you're developing this, it could be deployed in France, but there's no way it's going to get through the Middle Eastern regulations. And so think about how you could use this type of system to actually create value and not displace anyone. Because I know in businesses like yours, you spend a lot of time doing a lot of rework that's not value added because of silly things like that, where people aren't aware, or you have so much review board activity to make sure you're meeting things that could be communicated like that. So you need to kind of think about, and this starts with your strategy, right? So what is the business strategy? What is the ultimate goal? Who are the customers that are involved in your conversation? And so, what's your plan, right? Because, your others are starting already. And I kind of talked about this already. So, teams are identifying use cases. People are fitting generative AI into accountability structures. People are starting to use commodity models. And they're leveraging existing human capital and people. And they're leveraging existing human technical capabilities. Now, to some extent, their approach isn't going to work, because the culture is not necessarily ready. Because those processes that I just walked you through, you have to think about a little bit different. You're not solving problems in the same way that you were thinking about solving problems before. The infrastructure is certainly not ready, because these models cost a lot of money to run. And so if you were just to take these problems and look at them the same way, you're going to end up spending a lot more money than you would otherwise. Your data is not ready. These models are completely useless without the data. So you need to make sure your data is ready. The governance structure is not ready for this. And so these models have a tremendous impact on AI, on governance around AI. We're in the EU right now. 2 weeks ago, the EU already said that OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, all of these, Minstrel, who's in the EU, all of them violated GDPR, every single one of them. All of them are in violation of the EU AI Act, almost definitely, based on my understanding of it. I'm not a lawyer, but based on my understanding, they're all going to get sued under the EU AI Act. What is your liability for using these models? Who knows? Right? So think about how you're going to approach these. What's your governance structure? How much indemnification? Now, from all those I just mentioned, if you're using them, except for Minstrel, because it's open source, you're fully indemnified. So think about how you're going to engage with these types of technologies through governance in your company. The number one thing I tell my clients is, because one of the things I do is help customers with governance, is don't ever buy any AI system unless you're fully indemnified. It's that simple. That needs to be in your procurement policies. Okay? And you need to assess your maturity around AI. Most companies have no idea where their maturity level is. They don't know where they sit in all of these different kind of buckets. Okay? Now, from an organizational structure perspective, you need to make sure that you have laid the foundation in order to build out all of these systems. So you have the right organizational structure to have the conversations about what is the business strategy and how are we going to use this, how are we going to leverage AI to help accelerate the business strategy. And so what do I mean by business strategy? What are your organizational goals? So what is it that you report to your shareholders, your owners, whomever they may be, and how is AI going to help you accelerate those business objectives? Just like any other technology solution. How are you going to develop the culture to actually get at those solutions? So what are the cultural changes that you're going to make? How are you going to structure for accountability? This is often something that most people miss. There needs to be some level of accountability structure, because I just referred to 2 of many regulations that are existing only in the EU around data and AI. All of these models are subject to those 2. There's 27 at least in the US that I know of. There's more around the world. So who's accountable just for the regulations, let alone your internal policies? And who's accountable for making sure that the systems you're developing are aligned to your business objectives? And so how do you do that? How do you make sure that the skills that are being built up across the organizations are being built up evenly across this? Who's responsible for developing the right mentorship programs? Implementing training and development. And then ensuring that as you're building out these objectives, who is responsible for measuring the KPIs? So what are the right KPIs to measure? If you think about when I went back to Monsanto, when I talked back to my Monsanto story, I could tell you down to the dollar how much value we generated. I could tell you to the dollar how much value we generated at IBM. Our metrics were dollars and cents. That doesn't make sense for every company, but for most companies it does. Who's the accountable person that is responsible for tracking that, and what's the metrics for that? And how are you realizing this business value? Those are the types of organizational and structural changes that you need to make for a successful transformation. And why is that? Because the only way you're going to change the culture is to drive business leaders and drive that middle management. Because almost always, and this is no different than any other cultural change, almost always the leaders want the change, and the people at the bottom of the organization want the change. The people at the bottom of the organization want the change because they see it as mobility. The people at the top of the organization want the change because they're the ones that are asking for the change. And the people in the middle of the organization see change as a threat to their job security for the most part. And so the best way to motivate them is with business value. And so by giving them objectives that they can relate to, it helps give them some incentive to change, and it's no different than any other change. And so we need to start thinking about this in the same way, and that's why I often go back to, it's just another cultural change. It's just like any other cultural transformation that we're trying to make, and because it's this new, cool, shiny tool, we often forget about that. And so I mentioned 2 regulations that are out there. So it's really, really important in light of these regulations that we are prepared for this regulatory environment. And these regulations are coming up around the world. So not just in Europe. Amazing that even the federal government in the US is thinking about regulations. I'm very cynical about that typically. In the Middle East, around Africa, in China, there's already regulations. So there's regulations in the space popping up around the world. Korea had one of the first regulations. What are your ethical principles? And so I encourage every company to develop a set of ethical principles around AI and make those public so that your customers and your employees know exactly what you will and won't do. So about 6 years ago at IBM, we declared that we would not do any facial recognition, general purpose facial recognition with AI. I was responsible for a $5 billion business that was general purpose facial recognition. We shut it down because that was against our ethics. Right? That's a statement, and we followed through with it because it was not right to do, because the technology just wasn't ready. And so having ethical principles and standing by them is important, and making them public and standing by them is important for your employees and your customers. Having a governance structure is really, really important, and I talked about that already. And then making sure that you have standards. So one of the things that the EU AI Act called out is that the way that you know if you're complying with it is there's ISO standards. And so they are referencing these ISO standards for high-risk use cases. And unfortunately for you all, a lot of what you do is going to fall into some high-risk use cases, potentially, because you are trying to get human beings to do things, potentially, depending on how your legal teams in the EU interprets it. So what you're doing could be considered trying to change someone's behavior. And so you may need to comply with a high-risk standard of a use case. Again, that's for your legal and compliance teams to determine, and we'll see when the EU starts enforcing this what they really comes, because that's what they're going to tell you is we need to wait till there's litigation and wait for one of the big companies to get sued. You're not going to get sued. And then what are the environmental implications? And so what most people don't recognize either, or maybe you saw the paper, was about a year ago there were two papers that came out. One that said that when they trained the original ChatGPT that came out back in November, the amount of carbon it generated was equivalent to about 125 round trips between New York and Beijing. And then, does anyone know how much water it consumes, just water, from cooling GPUs, the computer hardware, for every about 25 prompts you put into ChatGPT? Anyone? About a half a liter of water for every 20, 25 questions you ask. So what is the environmental impact? How are you using these systems? So you need to think about how you're leveraging these systems internally and what impact that has on the environment. Now, we're developing technologies to help overcome some of that. But there is still an impact that you need to think about in your business, because Alistair was just talking about the ESG footprint, right? So that's part of it too. How's technology going to negatively impact that? Now, there's also opportunity for this technology to help improve your AI impact as well. And then there's what are the social implications? And so, I have if you want to, I have a very brief AI readiness assessment that you can do. Feel free to scan the QR code, and yet another QR code for you to scan. And then when you're all done scanning that, I have another one where I have a book coming out next month that you can go ahead and scan that goes into a lot more detail about what I just walked you through. And I have a couple more minutes if anyone has any questions. No? All right. And whoops, here's the dimensions that you can, except my E fell over. And there you can pre-order your book. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.